everyone. For those who knew me from the past may know that I used to practice Tantra, Western Tantra. In fact, on my spiritual journey since I was 25, I've explored different paths such as yoga, to Tantra, to plant medicine, and now to Buddhism. In fact, it doesn't matter what path you practice, the goal is the same. Eventually, we all want to be awakened and liberate from all sufferings in life, which means that the purpose is to be non-attached, because attachment leads to suffering. So although one may say all paths are equal in a way that they may all lead to awakening, but it doesn't mean that all paths are equally easy. So it doesn't mean that all paths are suitable for everybody. And what I realized by practicing Tantra was that it did not work for me in the end, hence the purpose of making this video. Why it didn't work for me in the end? Because in the end I found I actually grew more attachment, which means it would lead to more suffering for me. So the purpose of all these different spiritual practices is to be non-attached, not to grow more attachment. The path of Tantra is to get rid of attachment while being in a desire, while the practice of Buddhism, except some of the higher practices of Vajrayana Buddhism, is to stay away from the desires. So it's much easier for us to let go of our attachment to desires. For example, if you want to get rid of cheese for your diet, is it easier to get rid of cheese by not seeing it, or while there is a platter of the most delicious different types of cheese in front of you? So I think the answer is obvious. It was really due to a misunderstanding of the subject of Tantra, and I now understand why this is called a higher path, and it's definitely not for most people. Perhaps if one wants to realize the final stage of Buddhahood, one may have to undergo tests like this, but this is not for ordinary people. So in Vajrayana Buddhism, it also contains tantric practices, but these practices are highly regulated, and it's only for people with a very high level of consciousness, very solid level of meditation. They have actually to be enlightened to do this, and not just a basic level of enlightenment. So there are many different levels of enlightenment. In the Mahayana Buddhist system, there are actually 51 stages of the Bodhisattva path until you realize Buddhahood, which is the 52th stage. So one has actually to obtain a high level of enlightenment to the state of non-regression in order to practice this path. Otherwise, one could just fall back in any moment and be attached, and the resonant karma is actually hell. So you either become a Buddha through this path, or you fall into hell after this life, or even just in this life, because you grew more attachment and there are more sufferings, and then you feel like you're already living in hell. If we look at the life of the Buddha, we will also gain inspiration from this. Why didn't Buddha just go back to the palace and become enlightened and stay with his wife? Because he knew that most people couldn't do it. Most people cannot be unattached while being in a desire. So that's why he did not show us that way. And he showed us the way of non-attachment, to stay away from the desire, so it's easier for us not to be attached. Otherwise, it's so easy for one to be just drowned in more desires and more attachment, and one may not even be aware, because our mind may make up all sorts of stories to trick us, and then until one day we found, oh, again, I have grown more attachment. Yes, so that was why in the end I had to leave this path, and I definitely apologize to people whom I might have misled into thinking that the tantric path is an easy path, that it is for a lot of people. It's actually not like that at all. So deep repentant of what I did in the past, and I'm hoping to reduce my karma by sharing more of Buddhism, especially Pure Land Buddhism. This is the easiest path that Buddha recommends us to practice, especially during Dharma decline age. And this practice comprised of simply reciting the name of Amitabha Buddha, simply being mindful of Amitabha Buddha. So Amitabha Buddha means the Buddha of infinite light and infinite life. When we chant this name, it's like a mantra. It can help us to remove our illusions and remove our attachments. So you transform whatever your attachment or negative thinkings into the name of Amitabha Buddha, which resonates with our own Buddha nature. And I found this practice is so easy and it really works well for me. Also, what Buddha says in the sutra is that by practicing this method, one can actually gain rebirth to Amitabha Buddha's Pure Land after death. So one obtains the best rebirth after death, and one can obtain infinite life while being in Amitabha Buddha's Pure Land, and one can achieve enlightenment fairly quickly. It's very difficult to obtain enlightenment in one lifetime, but this is the easy path that you don't need to obtain enlightenment in this lifetime. What you do is to recite the name of Amitabha Buddha, and then at the time of death, you will be reborn into Amitabha Buddha's land. And there you will obtain enlightenment very quickly. It's stated in the sutras, and it has been a lot of cases of people who successfully gain rebirth, who successfully exit the cycle of reincarnation. So if we stay in the cycle of reincarnation, there will always be countless of sufferings unless we obtain enlightenment. But it's difficult to obtain enlightenment, so Buddha recommends us to seek rebirth to the Pure Land first, and there we will obtain infinite life and enlightenment fairly quickly. It's actually a lot of information, which I'll try to share more about Pure Land Buddhism and how effective I found the practice is. In every day of our life, you can literally just recite the name of Amitabha Buddha anywhere in whatever you do. This is the easiest meditation I've found to help remove our attachment and our negative thinking, and to help us to be in the present as often as possible. Also, it helps us to obtain the best next life. There's a lot of information, but it's all stated in the sutras by the Buddha, and I hope to share more of this with you in the near future. Namo Amitabha Buddha.